Let us begin with figures of speech. This is a very important topic in literature in English. It appears in your exams every single year. By the end of this lesson, you will understand the meaning of figures of speech, the major figures of speech including simile, metaphor, personification, hyperbole, irony, paradox, oxymoron, euphemism, alliteration, assonance, consonance, onomatopoeia, and apostrophe, and how to answer exam questions. Take your notes. Let us go. First, what are figures of speech? Figures of speech are words or phrases that are used in a non-literal way to create a special effect. They make language more vivid, imaginative, and expressive. Instead of saying something directly, a figure of speech says it in a creative way. Figures of speech are common in poetry, but they also appear in prose and drama. Writers use figures of speech to paint pictures in the reader's mind, to express emotions strongly, and to make their writing memorable. Now let me explain simile. A simile is a figure of speech that compares two different things, using the words like or as. Similes make descriptions more vivid. They help the reader understand something unfamiliar by comparing it to something familiar. For example, her eyes sparkled like diamonds. This simile compares the brightness of her eyes to the sparkle of diamonds. It tells the reader that her eyes are very bright and beautiful. Another example, he was as brave as a lion. This compares his bravery to the courage of a lion. Another example, the news hit me like a thunderbolt. This compares the shock of the news to being struck by lightning. Similes are easy to identify because of the words like or as. Now let me explain metaphor. A metaphor is a figure of speech that compares two different things without using like or as. It says that one thing is another. Metaphors are more direct and powerful than similes. For example, the world is a stage. This metaphor says that the world is like a stage, and people are actors. Another example, time is a thief. This metaphor says that time steals moments from our lives. Another example, he has a heart of stone. This metaphor says that he is cold and unfeeling, like stone. Metaphors can be extended over several lines or sentences. An extended metaphor is a comparison that continues throughout a passage or poem. Metaphors are very common in poetry and dramatic language. Now let me explain personification. Personification is a figure of speech that gives human qualities or abilities to non-human things. These things can be animals, objects, or ideas. Personification makes the non-human seem alive and relatable. For example, the wind whispered through the trees. Wind cannot actually whisper. Whispering is a human action, but this personification makes the wind seem gentle and secretive. Another example, the sun smiled down on the earth. The sun does not have a face and cannot smile, but this personification makes the sun seem warm and friendly. Another example, death knocked on his door. Death cannot knock, but this personification makes death seem like a visitor. Personification is often used in poetry to describe nature. Now let me explain hyperbole. Hyperbole is a figure of speech that uses extreme exaggeration for emphasis or effect. Hyperbole is not meant to be taken literally. It expresses strong emotion or humor. For example, I have told you 1,000,000 times. The speaker has not actually said it 1,000,000 times. The hyperbole emphasizes their frustration. Another example, I am so hungry I could eat a horse. The speaker cannot actually eat a horse. The hyperbole emphasizes their extreme hunger. Another example, she cried a river of tears. Tears cannot fill a river. The hyperbole emphasizes her deep sadness. Hyperbole is common in everyday speech and in literature. Now, let me explain irony. Irony is a figure of speech where there is a contrast between expectation and reality. There are three main types of irony. Verbal irony is when a person says the opposite of what they mean. Sarcasm is a form of verbal irony. For example, after a terrible storm, someone says, "What lovely weather we are having." They mean the opposite. Situational irony is when the opposite of what you expect happens. For example, a fire station burns down. You expect the fire station to be safe from fire, but it is not. Dramatic irony is when the audience knows something that the characters do not know. For example, in a horror movie, the audience knows the killer is in the house, but the character does not. Dramatic irony creates suspense and tension. Now, let me explain paradox. A paradox is a statement that seems to contradict itself but actually reveals a deeper truth. Paradoxes appear illogical at first, but when you think about them, they make sense. For example, the more you give, the more you have. This seems contradictory because giving usually means having less, but it means that generosity enriches the giver in non-material ways. Another example, less is more. Having less can be more valuable because it forces focus and simplicity. Another example, the beginning of the end. This phrase means that when something starts to end, the end has already begun. Paradoxes are common in poetry and philosophical writing. Now let me explain oxymoron. An oxymoron is a figure of speech that combines two contradictory terms. The words seem to cancel each other out, but together they create a new meaning. Examples include bittersweet, which combines bitter and sweet to describe a feeling that is both painful and pleasant. Deafening silence combines deafening, which is loud, with silence, which is quiet. It means a silence that feels overwhelmingly loud. Living dead combines living and dead to describe vampires, zombies, or people who are alive but not truly living. Jumbo shrimp combines jumbo, which means large, with shrimp, which is small. It is a humorous contradiction. Oxymorons are often used in poetry to create striking images. Now let me explain euphemism. A euphemism is a mild or indirect word or phrase used to replace a harsh or unpleasant one. People use euphemisms to be polite or to avoid causing offense. For example, instead of saying died, people say passed away. Instead of saying fired, people say let go or made redundant. Instead of saying toilet, people say restroom or bathroom. Instead of saying old, people say senior or experienced. Euphemisms are common in everyday language. Writers use euphemisms to create a specific tone. A character who uses many euphemisms may be evasive or overly polite. Now let me explain alliteration. Alliteration is the repetition of the same consonant sound at the beginning of several words in a row or close together. Alliteration creates rhythm and emphasis. It makes phrases more memorable. For example, Peter Piper picked pickled peppers. The P sound is repeated. Another example, she sells seashells by the seashore. The S and SH sounds are repeated. Another example, the wild wind whipped through the woods. The W sound is repeated. Alliteration is common in poetry, tongue twisters, and advertising slogans. It makes language musical and catchy. Now let me explain assonance. Assonance is the repetition of the same vowel sound within several words in a row or close together. Unlike alliteration, which repeats consonant sounds at the beginning of words, assonance repeats vowel sounds anywhere in the words. For example, the rain in Spain falls mainly on the plain. The long A sound is repeated. Another example, fleet feet sweep by sleeping geese. The long E sound is repeated. Another example, try to light the fire. The long I sound is repeated. Assonance creates internal rhyme and musicality. It is often used in poetry, alongside alliteration and rhyme. Now, let me explain consonance. Consonance is the repetition of the same consonant sound anywhere in several words in a row or close together. Consonance is similar to alliteration, but alliteration only repeats sounds at the beginning of words. Consonance repeats sounds anywhere. For example, the lumpy, bumpy road. The P sound is repeated at the end of lumpy and bumpy. Another example, all mammals named Sam are clammy. The M sound is repeated throughout. Another example, the ship has sailed the deep seas. The S and P sounds are repeated. Consonance creates texture and emphasis. Now let me explain onomatopoeia. Onomatopoeia is the use of words that imitate the sounds they describe. These words sound like what they mean. For example, buzz imitates the sound of a bee. Hiss imitates the sound of a snake. Boom imitates the sound of an explosion. Splash imitates the sound of water. Clang imitates the sound of metal hitting metal. Whisper imitates the sound of quiet speech. Onomatopoeia makes writing more vivid and sensory. It is common in poetry, comics, and children's books. When you read an onomatopoeic word, you can almost hear the sound. Now let me explain apostrophe. Apostrophe is a figure of speech in which the speaker addresses an absent person. an abstract idea, or a thing, as if it were present and could respond. The speaker speaks directly to someone or something that cannot answer. For example, in Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, Mark Antony addresses the body of Caesar. "O mighty Caesar, dost thou lie so low? Caesar is dead and cannot hear." The apostrophe expresses Antony's grief and anger. Another example, "O death, where is thy sting?" The speaker addresses death as if it were a person. Another example, "Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are." The speaker addresses the star. Apostrophe creates emotional intensity. It is common in poetry and dramatic speeches. A common exam question asks you to define figures of speech and give examples. Here is a sample answer. Figures of speech are non-literal uses of language to create special effects. Examples include simile, which compares using like or as, metaphor, which compares directly, personification, which gives human qualities to non-human things, hyperbole, which exaggerates, irony, which contrasts expectation with reality, paradox, which seems contradictory but reveals truth, oxymoron, which combines contradictions, euphemism, which substitutes mild words for harsh ones, alliteration, which repeats initial consonant sounds, assonance, which repeats vowel sounds, consonance, which repeats consonant sounds, onomatopoeia, which imitates sounds, and apostrophe, which addresses the absent as present. Another exam question asks you to distinguish between simile and metaphor. Here is your answer. Simile compares two different things using like or as. For example, her smile is like the sun. Metaphor compares two different things without using like or as. It says one thing is another. For example, her smile is sunshine. Similes are more explicit. Metaphors are more direct and powerful. Both create vivid imagery. Understanding the difference is essential for literary analysis. Another exam question asks you to distinguish between alliteration, assonance, and consonance. Here is your answer. Alliteration repeats the same consonant sound at the beginning of words. Assonance repeats the same vowel sound anywhere in words. Consonance repeats the same consonant sound anywhere in words. Alliteration focuses on the start of words. Assonance focuses on vowel sounds. Consonance focuses on consonant sounds anywhere. All three create musicality and emphasis in poetry. Here is what you need to take away. Figures of speech are non-literal uses of language. Simile uses like or as to compare. Metaphor compares directly. Personification gives human qualities to non-human things. Hyperbole exaggerates. Irony contrasts expectation with reality. Paradox seems contradictory but reveals truth. Oxymoron combines contradictions. Euphemism substitutes mild words for harsh ones. Alliteration repeats initial consonant sounds. Assonance repeats vowel sounds. Consonance repeats consonant sounds anywhere. Onomatopoeia imitates sounds. Apostrophe addresses the absent as present. Understanding figures of speech is essential for analyzing literature. Practice these concepts. When you have them down, move to topic 6.